Bowersville Church of Christ Adult Sunday School class. And this lesson today ties in with the sermon series we've been doing about the book of Acts. Which Roger Howard will be moderating and will inform me of when we are done. We are kind of basing this on some of the issues that we see in the book of Acts. And in Acts chapter 1, verse 8, it sort of sets up one of the big ideas that that followers of Jesus, and specifically his apostles, but it applies to all people, that they are going to be witnesses for Jesus, or really, since we're not eyewitnesses of Jesus' resurrection, that we will be telling people about Jesus, and that message will spread in our community. So for us, that's Bowersville, Jamestown, Sabina, Cedarville, like this, Xenia. Draw a 20-minute circle, right? Greene County, Fayette County, Clinton County. In our community, we should be telling people. And then also in our region, so we probably think in terms of like in the state of Ohio, we need to be actively participating and sharing then to the ends of the earth. So, and we support missionaries who are doing that work on multiple continents, telling people about Jesus, as important as it is. But what I really want to hone in is on like personally in conversations that we have with people. If we're telling someone about Jesus, I want us to think about what are common questions about and objections to the Christian faith. So if you're saying, hey, I know you're not a follower of Jesus, you're not a Christian, and I think you should become one, and someone says, well, I would, but this. All right? And those questions are things that we should be able to give the answers to. Now, in 1 Peter 3, 15 and 16, he says so as much, and this verse is largely the rationale for what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about one specific objection that people have, but the rationale is 1 Peter 3, 15 and 16, and it says to those people. And as we think about reading this, we should understand the difference between our situation and theirs. These were people that were Christians in a region of the world that was being persecuted the most. Christianity was largely an illegal activity in which they could be arrested and accused of false accusations made against them, and they had very little to zero sort of defense, the mechanism for them to be able to defend themselves. And so, we talking about like, hey, I'm having a conversation with my neighbor or maybe a family member, and this comes up. So it was high stakes for them. But the same thing applies no matter how intense the situation is personally from speaking up about Christ. It says, but in your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense for anyone who asks you for the reason for the hope that is in you. Peter's saying you need to have answers to the questions that people might ask you about your faith. He also says, yet do this with gentleness and respect. Now, what we're talking about is having a dialogue. Now, if we think about how people talk to each other, and especially when there are areas of tension or disagreement, is gentleness and respect what the 21st century is known for at this point, right? No. And the most common example of us seeing this to be the case is what? Uncivil conversation. Politics, right? I don't know why I do this, but sometimes when after the kids are in bed and I'm killing time, I will watch Senate and House of Representative, like their hearings, and a line of questioning. They're like 5 or 6 minutes apiece. And there's certain senators that I like to hear from. and they really like to, they get up there and they're sitting on their podium and they're grilling the guy that's sitting down there lower than them and like the one I was watching this week was Dr. Anthony Fauci, and they were grilling them and hurling all these accusations against them. And I understand that it's political theater and each one has an agenda, yada, 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 but you used to think, well, if the point of this hearing is to resolve problems, then the tone has to completely change, right? And I think and it's not just in politics. I was walking out of Aldi the other day, and this girl, there was 2 spots open, all right? So the one guy was starting to pull through into the second spot, because you don't want to have to back out, right? Backing out causes a problem. So he's pulling through. But as he was doing this, there was already this girl that was backing up into the same spot that he was pulling into. All right? And I don't think that the guy pulling through saw the girl trying to back up. I honestly, because it was happening all quick, and she throws her vehicle into park, swings open her doors, says, "Oh, bleep, bleep, bleep." And the guy backs out completely out of the spot, moves way down the aisle, and I would assume they're going to be in the store at the same time. If I was him, I might not even gone into Aldi that day. I might be like, I'm going to avoid that, right? But it's like, hey, it's not that big of a deal. It was just a simple, not linked up, and both of them not being aware of the situation. But it just shows that, having a conversation about things where people may disagree on two sides can be done with gentleness and respect. And the verse says, having a good conscience, so that when you're slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame. The other sort of idea that sort of spurred this is Paul, when he's in chapter 26, when he's before King Agrippa, says, no, what I'm saying to you is reasonable and true. So we want to be able to demonstrate the ways in which the Christian faith is reasonable and true. Now, part of the struggle in this is that people get their information from all sorts of things. Let me give you a couple of examples. Every Easter on AMC and the History Channel, around Christmas and Easter, there are these things about, let me tell you the real untold story about about Jesus' life and the resurrection. Are you familiar with these? Have you ever seen these things? Or there's one that's like, let me tell you about all the Gospels that the Christians, it's implied, sneakily threw out of the Bible because they didn't like what they said, all right? And so, now, was there a process in which there were books that were about Jesus which were not put in the Bible and others were included? Absolutely. But someone will see that hey, these Christians, they threw out the Gospel of Peter and the Gospel of Judas. What else are they up to? And then you might have a conversation with someone who said, you know what, you're a Christian, but what about this thing I saw on TV? Seriously, I've had a conversation with people. What about this thing I saw on the History Channel? And I always say the thing about the History Channel is that it doesn't include a lot of history. I think back in the mid-2000s, there was a book that came out called The Davinci Code. Did anyone ever read the Davinci Code? Do you remember it coming out and causing an uproar? It's written by an author named Dan Brown, and he does something called historical fiction. Fiction being the important word, where it's he will take pieces of things that are historical fact and weave them into a story, and it's usually about religious stuff. This book, The Davinci Code, was made into a movie in which Tom Hanks was the protagonist. He was Robert Langdon. And I read the book. It's really interesting. But in the book, and again, it's fiction. In the book, the idea is that Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene, and they had children together. And those offsprings the offspring of that relationship was the Holy Grail, which some people were trying to protect, other people were trying to eliminate. Now you're like, that sounds like a wild story, but people believe it. Maybe that did happen. And so part of the struggle is people get information from some bad sources. That's why it's difficult to answer. I remember when I was a youth minister, I've never seen this movie. The movie's called Dogma, and I think it was about two fallen angels who came to earth. And two of these kids that had watched this movie kept asking me, well, in the movie Dogma, this had happened. In the movie Dogma, this had happened. I'm like, you realize that is just a movie. That is not like designed to be where it was giving you facts about what is real in God. And there's other things where the other sources, and maybe not from media, but from, hey, I was told by someone who's perceived to be a spiritual authority that the things that are completely off base. There's people that will say, you will go to hell if you listen to this kind of music. Whatever it is. There's even people say that if you listen to any music with a syncopated rhythm, even if it has Christian lyrics, that is wrong, but maybe not with eternal concepts, but that is wrong. There's people who believe that it says in the Bible, you should dress your best to go to church. I was teaching a youth group Sunday school class when I first got to my church in Virginia, and the kids asked me, what verse in the Bible says that? I said, there's no verse in the Bible that says that. People dress a certain way to go to church for this reason, this reason, this reason, but it is not directly talked about in the Bible. I have heard people say that, I know someone that was taught by a Sunday school teacher when they were a kid, that if you ever use the Lord's name in vain, even once, you are irredeemably damned to go to hell. So don't do it. And so people say some wacky stuff, and part of the issue when answering things about our faith is people believe it. You add the internet, bloggers, especially to the equation, there's a quagmire of disinformation and confusion. Anyone who is properly motivated today, any one of you, if you have internet access or a phone that has data on it, you could create a blog for free and say absolutely anything that you want to say. All right. And the old joke is, if it's on the internet, it must be what? True. And we kind of say that tongue in cheek, but like there's a lot of people who think, well, if it's on the internet, it must be true, when it's clearly not. And so there's a particular issue that I want us to think about today. And I sent out a question to some people in the congregation. I'm like, what are the questions that you hear about Christianity that you run into? Or maybe even against Christianity? And there was one answer that I got like 3 times. And I thought we could address that this morning. It is this. And I'm directly quoting from a couple of messages I received in return. I hear about Christians are hypocrites and judgmental. Or I hear people comment about churches, I don't need a church to tell me how bad I am or to judge. I believe in God, and that's all I need. Anyone heard anything like that before? The second comment was, I believe in God, but not the church. They are full of hypocrites, and they exploit their congregation for money. Now let me before we get to the core issue of hypocrisy, there's a couple sort of satellite issues there that are indirectly influence the conversation. One is about money, and other is the need for a church family. I can't speak for all churches, because there are some churches where money is a big focus. I think there's a church in Wilmington where when you visit, they want your income information so they know how much Lonnie was telling me about this. How did that go? So that you tithe. They ask you your income information, maybe the first time you even come, so that they know if you start giving, if you're tithing or not, right?
The person that they did that to never went back.
Yeah, so the person that did that went back, and never went back, all right? To any church, all right? So part of what I would say is like, hey, if it's true, because we're talking about there's what's true for our congregation, us here, and there's what's true for all churches, and sometimes like the churches are a little bit too interested in money. We got to own it. I know of churches where, like, if you want to become a member, you have to pledge to give a certain amount of your income. I know of another church of where the senior minister has access to all the giving, the giving of every member of the congregation. Right? And like, I don't know any of that, and I don't want to know. Here's what I'd say about money in our church. Two things. God has blessed us, and people have been, because his people, you have been extremely generous over the last 18 months especially. We have been more healthy and stable during the pandemic than we've been in quite some time. That's despite the fact that we're closed for 3 months, and now we don't even pass the plate, right? We had this conversation like, should we start passing the plate again? I'm like, no, because there is this perception that church is about money, and like and we don't ever really talk about it much because we don't need to. I was talking with Joanne the other day. I'm like, we don't talk about money much at the church at all, giving. He's like, you're right, you don't. And part of it is because of this perception. The other thing is I don't need a church family, which is just as common. What I would say is like, well, if you would come to a church, you would find that there's plenty to get, but there's also plenty to give. Even if you don't need a church family may need you to contribute in some sort of selfless way. And so that's sort of on the side, we want to think about a little bit about the hypocrisy question. Now, I must say, most of us understand the comment, right? We don't appreciate hypocrisy. And the church is not immune from it. There are ministers of the high-profile variety. There are Bible college professors. There are high-profile leaders in Bible colleges and Christian universities that all fail. And I'm not just talking about things that I hear about through the grapevine, but I'm talking about, I know professors, ministers, university presidents, where that has been the case. And we would say that that is not good. And it's kind of like well known. I was talking to someone who doesn't attend our church, attended another church, and he said, well, at the church that I was going to, things are kind of rough. The youth minister ran off with the preacher's wife. And he kind of said, and like, that happens sort of semi-frequently. And he said such a way, it's like, it's the kind of thing that just happens sometimes. And so those things are not like good. There are things with problems, obviously, with money, and sex, and power. And so, first of all, we have to acknowledge that on some level it does exist, but we have to have a more nuanced conversation about it. There's a fellow named Josh McDowell. He wrote this on his website, josh.org. He said, it must be admitted that there's been hypocrisy in the church, and today we are not exempt from people who are hypocritical. And then he talks about what a hypocrite is. A hypocrite is an actor and one who puts on a false face. Have any of you ever seen the Mission Impossible movies? One of the stunts that the Mission Impossible movies do is you think it's Ethan Hunt is the main guy, right? Tom Cruise's character. You think it's Ethan Hunt, and he's doing one thing, and then all of a sudden, he rips off that face mask, and it's someone completely different. So that's what hypocrisy is. In the Greek language, when the Bible talks about hypocrisy, it's talking about wearing a mask, making someone think that you are someone different than you actually are. So that's what it is. All right, back to what he said. However, just because the church contains hypocrites does not mean that all Christians are hypocrites. And with every example of hypocrisy that can be pointed to in the church, a counter example can be pointed out showing people who live consistently with the teaching of Jesus Christ. And so you start by saying, the church is full of a bunch of hypocrites, and we start by saying, well, there may be some hypocrites, because we're human, and humans can be hypocritical. Certainly not everyone is, not these people. And if you think about what a Christian is, it is a person who needs to be forgiven of their sins. So part of the problem with this issue is when someone pretends to be sinless and they are like covering up the sin in their lives. But first and foremost, when we say what a Christian is, it is someone who knows that they have rebelled against God and know that they need to be forgiven. Going back to that article by Josh McDowell, it says, it's important not to confuse hypocrisy with sin. All Christians are sinners, but not all Christians are hypocrites. There's a misconception that a Christian is a person who claims that he does not sin. But the truth is that to call oneself a Christian is to admit to being a sinner. All believers, including clergy, are fallible human beings who are prone to all types of sin. Just because a person is not perfect does not mean that he is phony. The distinction between the two is important. The failures of the believers does not invalidate the truth. Jesus Christ had very harsh words for people who were committing the sin of hypocrisy, especially the religious leaders of his day. He denounced them in no uncertain terms. It's just because a Christian is a sinner doesn't mean that he is a hypocrite. But what he said there is that Jesus denounced hypocrisy. In Matthew 23, 27 through 28, he does it in the clearest of terms. And the people that he accused of hypocrisy, because they actually were the teachers of the law and the Pharisees, the religious people of his day. So in chapter 23 of Matthew, verses 27 through 8, he says, "Woe to you, teachers of the law, you and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of bones and of dead and everything unclean. In the same way, on the outside you appear to people as righteous, but on the inside you are full of hypocrisy and wickedness." So if we accept that everyone is a sinner, hypocrisy has to do with cloaking or hiding our sin in a way that misleads people. Now that being said, if you want to go to the other extreme, it'd be like, hey, we know that we're all sinners, and some people just like to air all their dirty laundry. Like, they'll tell you about any sin that they've ever committed. I don't think that's necessarily ideal as well. So we want to keep that in perspective. And so this question of hypocrisy made me think about, like, what are different approaches that people take to their faith? And how does hypocrisy fall into that? The first one reflects the sentiment of the bumper sticker. I'm sure you've seen it. Christians aren't perfect, but they are what? What does it say on the other side? The second half. What's that? Forgiven. The word, okay, it's usually they aren't perfect, they're just forgiven, all right? So I would agree. I was talking to someone who was asking me, well, what does it mean to really live the Christian life? And I talked about this bumper sticker, and I said, I agree with, there's 5 words. I agree with 4 of the 5. Christians aren't perfect, right? We know that. No matter how mature you become and how much you become like Jesus in your character, the way you think, the way you speak, we're not perfect. And we are forgiven, right? For sure. And that's important because we are not perfect. We need forgiveness. But when you say just, that's what gives me a little pause. Because I think it means, like, when we say just forgiven, it implies the one difference between my life before I met Jesus and after I met Jesus is that my sins have been forgiven. But between the lines, I think it's very easy to read, my daily life has not really changed in any way. And a Christian is functionally, in the way they live their lives day to day, no different than someone that is not a Christian. The difference is The only difference between A and B is that when the bill comes due for our sins, one believes that they are justified by their faith in Jesus Christ, and the other has not accepted that. Now, let me ask you, if that, and there is strains of that, no one's that bold about it, but someone who thinks that way, are they going to be a hypocrite? No, I don't think they are. I'm just forgiven. I'm very open about the sin and rebellion against God in my life. Second, there's someone who receives, who is a sinner, receives God's grace through Jesus Christ, and in doing so realizes the high cost of sin, the wisdom of allowing Jesus to lead your life, and a person who realizes that becoming a Christian means becoming like Jesus in every way. And this does not happen overnight. It happens very slowly. Often it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back when we're talking about Christian maturity. But eventually you can see real progress over time in becoming like Jesus. And one of my things is I like us to treat the Christian faith like we treat anything else, where we actually know if we're progressing or not. If my son is a runner, his season's over, but how does he measure whether he's improved or not? What's the only way you can? It's the time on the clock when you cross the finish line. And then whether that goes how he wants or how he doesn't want it to go, we talk about all the factors that go into that result. But it's clearly measurable. If I said my goal is to be a good manager of money and to be able to build some stability in my life and prepare for the future, can you objectively measure where that is? You can't, right? Because every month you get a bank statement, right? And it'll tell you whether you have less or more money. And then if you receive a retirement account statement, it'll tell you if you have less or more and how much it grew and how much it didn't. So it's all very measurable. And I'll admit that being a Christian and becoming like Jesus is a little more abstract, right? Like the way a school teacher will measure a student's progress or achievement is through a report card, right? We're not getting report cards. But here's what I'd say. We kind of know. We kind of know. And exactly where we are. We can tell if we're more patient than we were a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. We know if we're more kind, more forgiving. If we're honest to ourselves, we know. And here's the thing. Once a person begins to achieve maturity, there will be a distinction from people that do not know Jesus. They will become more like Jesus, less like the person they were before, less like the average person that they're running across in the streets. And then the question becomes, once your life begins to become different, what do you do? Because the temptation then is to feel proud, to feel superior, and to maybe look down your nose at someone. There's an article about this topic of how to deal with the hypocrisy questions on Focus on the Family. And it said this: even though we can recognize sin in others' lives, we should always respond with compassion. Jesus had compassion on people, seeing them as sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them we should follow Jesus' example. And one of the things that Jesus says about hypocrisy is in Matthew 7:3-4. It says, you know what, no matter how far you've come or think you've come as a follower of Jesus, talking about someone else's sin in a certain way is absurd on a level. He says, why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your own eye when there is a log in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. One of the ways that we say this in modern language is those in glass houses should not do what? Throw stones, right? So we have to be aware if we're becoming more mature is that there's a temptation to ditch the humility that leads one to ask God for forgiveness and adopt an air of superiority. The Bible tells us not to make hypocritical judgments, pointing out someone else's sin when we are wrong in the same area. Here's something else that I would say when it talks about judgment. Because kind of judgment and hypocrisy go hand in hand. We have to ask, what do we mean when we say that someone is being judgmental? Because it can mean two different things in my estimation. It can mean like I am looking down my nose at you and I think I'm better than you. And usually it's in a specific area in which people measure this, right? If you've ever had someone look down their nose at you and treat you like I am better than you, it's not a great feeling, is it? So any of that is not appropriate for a Christian. But I think sometimes when people say judgment, what they mean is if you make any moral statement about your beliefs. Now we wouldn't say like, you say that stealing and murder is wrong. Everyone agrees with that. But if you make a statement which I disagree with about what behavior is moral, what God wants and what is not, that is judgmental. That is not judgmental. In fact, someone criticizing discernment in that way, they're making a judgment themselves, aren't they? They're judging when it's not really judging at all. And so Jesus says not to judge in the way where, like, the person, we act as if the person has sinned against us. We are responsible only to God. In Luke 6:37-38, he says this, judge not, and you will not be judged. Condemn not, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Given, it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be poured to your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. And so what I always got from that verse is only be as hard on other people as you want people to be on you. And I want mercy and grace not just from God, but from people. And he's saying if you want that, then you need to offer it to other people. Roger, do we have any prayer requests? No. All right, let's close in quick prayer then. Dear God, we thank you for today. We thank you for all the ways you bless us. I pray that first of all that we will talk to others about you and the greatness of your love and care for us. And I pray that we will prepare ourselves and be ready when they have questions and even objections to it. And just help us to live transparent lives, admitting that we're sinners and as we grow that we need to know you each day. In your Son's name I pray. Amen.